All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing the evolution of product development, moving from those old school traditional steps all the way to modern lean startups. We're going to look at exactly how bringing new ideas to market has totally shifted from rigorous, heavy corporate planning to highly agile methods. Ultimately, we want to figure out how to prevent your next big project from becoming, well, a really costly flop. Let's get into it.
So let's start by tackling a classic, honestly super dangerous founder delusion. The question, will everyone buy this? You know the feeling, right? You wake up in the middle of the night, you've got this brilliant idea, and you just immediately assume it has universal market appeal. You're thinking, oh man, of course everyone needs this. But here's the catch. Jumping straight from that initial spark right into building the product without any real validation, that is exactly where the vast majority of dreamers go terribly, terribly wrong.
Because the reality is, most new ideas just end up in a graveyard of failed products. And the financial stakes here are absolutely massive. Companies routinely fail for a bunch of reasons. Sometimes they massively overestimate the market size, or they suffer from product design problems that result in just terrible usability. And sometimes they actually build the right product, but it's positioned, priced, or advertised completely wrong, so they end up sending the wrong message entirely. Throw in severely underestimated development costs and unforeseen competitive actions, and you've got a recipe for disaster. To avoid this graveyard, companies realized pretty early on that they needed a highly structured way to understand their customers and develop truly superior value.
So, decades ago, to avoid that exact graveyard, companies developed this rigorous 6-month risk reduction journey. It kicks off with idea generation and screening in month 1, then it moves to concept testing, business analysis, product development, test marketing, and finally, commercialization in month 6. Now, what's truly interesting about this sequential, multi-step process is the core philosophy behind it. Fundamentally, this is a risk reduction strategy. At every single stage, weak ideas are systematically killed off early to save time and money. For example, you only move on to month 4's product development if month 3's business analysis actually proves the idea is viable.
Now, the really crucial point in those early traditional steps is making the leap from a vague idea to a concrete concept. Having a product idea, like just saying, hey, I want to make a healthy drink, that's just a general thought, right? A product concept, on the other hand, is a highly detailed version of that idea, but explained entirely in the customer's language. It essentially forces you to articulate exactly what the product does, who it's for, and why they should actually care, all before you ever sketch out a design or, mix a single ingredient. And even if a company survived that rigorous business analysis and finally built the thing, they still wouldn't just launch it everywhere all at once. Instead, they relied heavily on traditional test marketing methods to mitigate those launch risks. For instance, they might use a standard test market, which means running a full-blown marketing campaign in just a few representative cities to see what happens. Or maybe they'd use a simulated test market, creating a literal fake shopping environment for a sample group of consumers. They might even use a controlled test market, where they'd actually pay a fee to place products in a select few stores. The ultimate goal was always the exact same: accurately project actual sales before going all in. But here's the thing. In our fast-paced modern world, especially when we're talking about tech and startups, that heavy, sequential, traditional process, it can just be way too slow and rigid. And this brings us to a major pivot in our narrative today: the modern lean approach. Lean thinking challenges us with a very simple yet incredibly profound definition of value creation. Value is providing true benefits to the customers. That's it. Anything else, any extra feature, any beautiful but totally unused design, any lengthy internal meeting is simply a waste. So the hard question you have to ask yourself is, how do you truly know if you're creating value versus just wasting your effort? Well, that brings us right to the heart of the lean startup methodology: the build, experiment, learn feedback loop. This is a massive paradigm shift away from those traditional rigid steps we just talked about. Instead of spending months building a final product in secret based on some thick business plan, the lean approach focuses heavily on continuously discovering real customer needs. And crucially, this is not just about asking customers what they want. Why? Because most of the time, customers have absolutely no idea what they want until they actually see it. So we really need to redefine what it means to be productive. True startup productivity literally cannot be measured by how many lines of code you write, or just how much stuff you're building every day. Success isn't about blindly delivering a product. Success is about delivering a product, or even just a feature, that customers will actually use. Your real job, your absolutely crucial job, is systematically figuring out the right thing to build every single day and continuously aligning your efforts with reality.
And to figure out the right thing to build, you absolutely have to identify your leap of faith assumptions. You want to pay really close attention to these because they are the absolute riskiest elements of a startup's concept. We're talking about the foundational pillars that your entire business model depends on. If these assumptions are wrong, the whole shebang collapses. That's why every lean venture has to build a minimum viable product, or MVP. It's specifically designed to test these core leap of faith assumptions immediately, way before any heavy engineering or mass production even begins.
Let's anchor this theory in reality with one of the most famous case studies in modern tech. We're talking about Dropbox. Now, building Dropbox in the early days was a monumentally difficult task. It required incredibly complex integration across multiple operating systems: Windows, Mac, mobile. It demanded deep, rare expertise in distributed systems, caching, replication, the works. But founder Drew Houston knew that literally none of that technical wizardry mattered if his core leap of faith assumption was wrong. And that assumption, that seamless file synchronization, was actually a major problem for everyday users. The massive risk here was spending years building a flawless, beautiful technical system that nobody actually wanted. So how on earth do you solve a massive technical risk like that?
How do you test a complex, multi-platform file syncing system without, actually building the whole thing first? Well, Drew Houston's minimum viable product was unexpectedly simple. He completely bypassed years of risky development by doing one thing. He just made a video. It was this completely banal 3-minute video demonstration narrated by Drew himself, just showing how the technology was meant to work. And he didn't target everyone with it either. He targeted early adopters, the kind of people who don't need a perfect, polished solution to get totally intrigued by a great concept. The validation they got from this simple experiment was just staggering. By simply showing people the solution and asking if they wanted it, the beta waiting list skyrocketed. It went from a pre-video baseline of about 5,000 people all the way up to 75,000 people, literally overnight. It completely blew the founders away. That 3-minute video perfectly served as an MVP. It didn't just answer technical questions, it provided a massive dose of reality and tested their fundamental business hypothesis, all without writing a million lines of code. And the ultimate result of that lean, focused validation strategy? Well, it laid the rock-solid foundation for a company that is today worth over $10 billion. To put that into perspective, by validating the actual need before overbuilding the solution, they ensured that every single subsequent hour of heavy engineering was actually creating value, rather than just generating a massive amount of waste.
But this begs the question, if launching an MVP is that effective, why don't more founders actually do it? Well, it brings us to a really fascinating psychological trap called the audacity of zero. Here's the dilemma. It's actually, perversely, often much easier to raise venture capital when you have zero revenue, zero customers, and zero traction than when you have a tiny amount of each. Why? Because zero invites wild imagination. Investors can just dream about your massive potential. But the second you launch an MVP and get small numbers, boom, it invites intense questions and doubt. And this creates a brutal incentive for founders to dangerously postpone launching anything at all until they are somehow certain of massive success.
So how do we actually overcome this dilemma? The key is to be highly strategic, and you can break it down into 3 steps. Step 1, use your MVP to experiment silently with early adopters within your beachhead market first. Seriously, don't do a massive public launch right out of the gate. Step 2, verify your concept by testing those terrifying leap of faith assumptions immediately. And step 3, scale out on a solid slate of real data. When you do it this way, the funding comes naturally. And more importantly, you're going to use that venture capital wisely to grow, rather than squandering it on building unproven ideas that nobody actually wants.
Which leaves us with this incredible, powerful heuristic from the source material. Think big, but start small. Look, whether we're talking about the rigid, sequential steps of traditional corporate planning or the highly agile, waste-reducing build, experiment, learn loop, the fundamental goal is exactly the same: proving that your idea actually holds water in the real world. So, as we wrap up this explainer and you look at your own projects and ambitions today, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. What is your biggest leap of faith assumption right now? And what is the absolute simplest MVP you could build tomorrow to test it?